Hi, I'm Andrew Sears. I'm the president of City Vision College, and I just wanted to give an overview of the background of City Vision and some of our vision for the organization for those of you who might be interested in coming alongside and partnering with us. Let me just start off and say, if you look at what the big challenge for education in the 20th century it was really focused on high school graduation. If you look at the beginning of the 20th century, less than 10% of people in the United States had a high school diploma, and there are a lot of people who said, we need to get universal secondary education. A lot of people said those people were crazy. But by the end of the century, I think it was agreed that we need to try to get universal secondary education. What you saw happen between 1910 and almost 1970, you had almost straight line growth, and then you ran into some fairly difficult intractable problems that we're still trying to solve today, where we got stagnated at about 80%. That I think relate to more fundamental problems in society around inequality and poverty and things along those lines. But if you look at what is the 21st century challenge, I would argue that the challenge really is the same type of problem, but we're working towards college graduation. So at the beginning of the 21st century, the college completion rate was in the 30s, and if you look at what is the reason for why there might be this need for much wider post-secondary or tertiary education, and a lot of the reason for that is the same reason why there's a need for high school, is because with high school you had the loss of agricultural jobs. Now you're seeing dramatic loss of industrial jobs, and that's dramatically hurting especially the bottom half of the country. William Julius Wilson has written a lot about that and the consequences to the cities. But you're seeing the percent of employment in manufacturing dropping from almost 40% at its peak to less than 10%. Part of what my doctoral dissertation was on is looking at the continued trend of automation, and what started with manufacturing jobs is actually going into a lot of other jobs, lower skilled jobs that are being replaced, and a lot of the predictions that in the next couple decades you're going to see about half of the jobs in America are going to be replaced. So they're going to be replaced with potentially jobs that require college education, and my dissertation goes into some of the statistics on that. So there's a lot of people who are looking at how do we increase the college attainment rate. One of the biggest groups that's looked at this as a vision has been the Lumina Foundation, and what they've done is they've said, if we keep growing college attainment at the current rate, we're going to be on this blue line here, where by 2025 we'll have 49% of the country. And a lot of people would say that's great, but the problem is that, and this is what my doctoral dissertation focused on, the rate of job loss is actually a lot faster than the rate that people are getting educated. So, to put it into the terms I use in my dissertation, we're essentially losing the race with the machine because we're not educating people fast enough. So what they did is they looked at, how quickly would we need to educate people to keep up with the changes in the economy, and they said, you need to change the trajectory to something more like this orange line. And I think that that's going to be a challenge to get to that by 2025. I think later in the century, I think we're going to see those rates, and I'll talk a little bit of why. But if you just take that blue line and you extrapolate that blue line to the rest of the century, and just assume it's going to be a straight line, then at 2093 you would actually have 100% college attainment rate, just based on current growth rates. Now, obviously, we know that's not going to happen. It's probably going to, be like with high school, where you're going to run into some intractable problems. I think it's likely to happen around 70 to 80% of the economy. But just a lot of the vision that we're based on is that this upcoming century, there's going to be a big shift towards increasing access to higher education. So there's a question of how do we get there? And anytime you make straight line predictions, it's not a good way of saying this is what the future is going to happen. And I'll talk about some of the problems with that. A study came out just in the past month that looked at bachelor's attainment by income quartile, and this is actually I referred to a previous study that looked at similar data in my doctoral dissertation. But if you look at what's happened in the past, from the 1960s until 2015, the past 50 years, there's actually been tremendous growth in higher education attainment, especially for the top 25%. So 37-point growth from 40% to 77% of those in the top 25% income-wise going to college. And then the next group is the next quartile, and there's been significant growth there, and that is the 19-point growth. But if you look at the bottom half, really what's happened is it's had very minimal change. So the next quartile, 6-percentage point growth over a 50-year period, and then a 3-percentage point growth. And really what you're saying for this is if you're in the bottom half, unless you're in this talented 10th portion, you're basically not going to go to college. And a lot of my background actually was from that. So I grew up in inner city Kansas City. I saw my best friend started doing drugs in second grade. My other best friend went to jail for robbing a bank. In high school, I worked at a Burger King that dealt drugs, and I saw the consequences of this. I was able to be a part of that talented 10th, to come out, but if our country is really going to make it in the next century, we can't just only have 10 or 15 or 20% of the bottom half being able to go to college. So that's a big part of the focus of City Vision. So if you look at what's likely to happen in terms of college attainment, now let's just take these growth rates for each of these quartiles, and then let's just take straight line growth rates. So what that means, and obviously straight line's not good, but I'm trying to make a point. What that means is that the top 25% by 2050, if you had straight line, all of them would be going to college. And then the next quartile, you're going to have more than half going to college by 2050. And really that top half has been the focus of traditional Christian higher education. But I believe that really the opportunity for the 21st century and really the opportunity for disruptive innovation is this bottom half, the bottom two quartiles, and that's really where City Vision's focus is. So if you take the straight line educational attainment, so say we just keep growing, based on the current rates, I said by 2093 you'd have 100%, but that's actually not going to happen because if you break up the different categories and you don't change how the poor are being served by higher education, the bottom half, and you average those quartiles, that's where you get this red line. So the orange line is if you average the entire country. The red line is where you average the quartiles, and the fact that the bottom half, less than 20%, is going to college, what that's doing is it's holding down the rest of the country's average. So someone's going to need to come up with a solution. That's the big opportunity. If you're looking for growth in the 21st century, it's going to come from this bottom half. So the question is, where does this growth come from? And there's a few different futures out there. Now, one which has been proposed by the Obama administration is the idea of universal community college. There's some pros and cons with that. Some people say that it could be an attempt to essentially nationalize higher education. Other people have, derogatorily called it Obamacare for higher education. A lot of developing countries have taken this approach. So there's 26 mega universities in the world that have over 1 million plus students, and a lot of those are very low cost. The challenge, as a Christian institution is, if you look to the government to solve all the problems, there's really two challenges. One is that you're going to increase the secularizing influence of government education. But the other problem, and I think that this is going to be even more fundamental, if you look at the growth of entitlements and other things, the government's running out of money. So the idea that it's going to add universal community college, it's going to be a difficult thing to continue to fund, even if they were able to get it to pass. So another option, instead of, there's the movie that came out, Waiting for Superman to Solve Our Problems. So some people think the government's going to solve all our problems. Other people think that it's going to be entirely private. So, Google, you can imagine a future where Google, Amazon, and Apple all provide essentially degrees through apps where, everything's provided for free, and then, you get all these courses, all these things that you learn, and it's a freemium model where you just pay, make a small payment at the end to get the credential. I actually think it's likely that by 2050 there's going to be 3 or 4 companies that provide about half the education globally. But I don't know that that's necessarily going to be a good future, because I think that it's going to follow the same secularizing tendencies as media conglomerates. It's also going to limit culture. So I think there's a third possible solution, and the question is, what role will Christians play in this? A lot of people are saying, well, the old Christian institutions will adapt. I'm a believer that you got to pour new wine in new wineskins, and that's what City Vision's aiming to be, is essentially a new wineskin. And what we do is we will partner with, number one and number two modularly, and really try to expand the Christian market share in post-secondary education. I think that there's some ways that we can do that, and I'll talk a little bit more about the strategies. So, how do you get to that solution? You have to start with disruptive innovation theory. So my background, after growing up in the hood, I kind of lived a story similar to the movie Good Will Hunting. Went to school at MIT, co-founded a research group with one of the fathers of the internet focused on internet telephony, and kind of became an expert in disruptive innovation theory, consulted to a lot of internet startups. And but if you look at the basic idea behind disruptive innovation theory, is that you start with one technology, and it serves a small number of customers, and that's what the size of the ring represents here. And then you expand to a disruption, and that expands the number of customers. So you started with mainframes, and there's the famous quote of the head of IBM saying that the global market for computers was probably 5. And obviously they are thinking about vacuum tube machines that they were providing to NASA, but then after that you provided transistors that created mainframes, and then you had PCs that replaced mainframes, and now you have mobile phones that are largely replacing PCs, where my mobile phone works always whenever I want it to. My PC almost never works the way I want it to. And that's the basic idea of disruptive innovation theory. And you look at the number of smartphones in the world, the number of mobile phones in the world, and it's eclipsed the number of PCs in the world. And the other way of looking at disruptive innovation theory is through higher education. So you have traditional higher education, and then you have this mid-tier. And I would say there's 3 groups that were addressing some of the deficiencies in traditional higher education. Each had their own strengths. So community college is one of them. The other is for-profit higher education, did a great job of meeting the needs of working adults. And then the other categories, I'd say, nonprofit or even for-profit, just the high-priced online education. All of those helped address part of the need, but I would say that they're getting ready to get replaced with something else that I would call radically affordable and radically accessible online education. And I think that in the same way that you had mainframes get replaced with PCs, get replaced with mobile, I think that transition is happening in higher education. Clayton Christensen, kind of the father of, who coined the term disruptive innovations, written multiple books on this, and there's a lot of people who believe that this is going to happen over the next decade or so. So the basic idea behind disruptive innovation theory is you start off with something that is greatly inferior, and then it gradually gets better. So, I worked in the voice over IP industry, and the first voice over IP and internet telephony calls were horrible. You had to press the button and then say over like a CB so the other person could pick up. Really bad quality. But this past year, Skype and other things have actually provided more international calls than all the phone networks combined. So you start off with a low quality use and then it gradually goes up. Another example is with digital cameras, where the first digital cameras, the first camera I had just horribly grainy pictures, cost a lot of money, but now you can get in your smartphone you have a digital camera that is better quality than most film cameras and uses a chip that costs less than $10. So that's the idea behind disruptive innovation theory. And the question is, where is online education? I would say online education is in this curve really between low quality use and medium quality use. And what's happening is its quality is improving, and as you add the ability to do adaptive learning, as you add the ability to have a diversity of courses that is comparable to what you have in app stores, then I think you're going to start to see some really high quality use cases come out of this, especially if you combine it with in-person elements of education. So being an innovation guy, I often, use this innovation curve. I'm sure most of you have seen this. The idea is that, the rate of adoption for any sort of either product or even a concept or idea follows a normalized curve. And you have, this blue part over there, that's the first standard deviation, 2.5%. Then you have the next group, that's the early adopters. The blue group's called the innovators, then the early adopters, and then you have other groups, the early majority, late majority, and the laggards. So a lot of people say, where are we in the adoption cycle for post-secondary degrees? So I'm looking at degrees as an innovation in itself, or post-secondary education. And the U.S. average, if you say, where are we? We're, about 38% of the country has a degree. But I think that that's actually not really the best way of looking at it, because I think a better way of looking at it is cultural groups broken up by income quartile. So if you look at the top 25%, that group is actually in the late majority stage, whereas the third quartile is in the early majority stage, and then the first and second quartiles are in this early adopter stage, where less than 10% or around 10% are adopting. And you have this thing called the chasm. And the idea behind the chasm, it was a term that was coined by Geoffrey Moore, and the idea is that usually the people who succeed in the early stages of a market don't succeed in the later stages. And I believe that there's a lot of people who've been serving the first and second quartile in the early stages that have really been targeting the talented 10th out of that, but I don't think they're going to serve them in the second stage. And you see a lot of examples of this. So Apple wasn't the first smartphone out there, but it designed a smartphone for the average person, and they replaced the Palm OS and the initial Microsoft Windows phones. And there's been other examples. So Google wasn't the first search engine, but they made it a lot simpler. Skype wasn't the first voice over IP company, but they made it simple. So there's a lot of commonalities to how do you cross this chasm. And there's also the same type of chasm to be crossed globally for higher education. And I think if we're going to get to this radically accessible, radically affordable, you're going to need to do some things. So, first is the radically affordable. So you have to have radically low cost, and either low or no debt. And as I mentioned before, you really got two options for that. You got a government subsidy, which is going to become increasingly challenging as the government runs out of money for just the demographic trends that are happening, or you have a disruptive innovation. That's how you're going to get radically affordable. Then you have ease of access. So, There's location, so someone doesn't have to go to a different campus. There's making it time, nights and weekends. There's making it accessible for working students. There's mobile. Then providing remedial education, basically providing adaptive education for students at any level. And then providing a cultural fit. So trying to make it adult friendly, trying to make it so that people don't have to assimilate either across class or across race. So those are the elements that I think that are critical for crossing the chasm. And if you look at, everyone's talked about the increasing cost of higher education. That's a lot of what my dissertation was on. The fundamental reasons for it is the cost of labor is going up. The cost of highly educated labor is going up. And in this chart you see that it's going up 600% compared to 100% growth for the Consumer Price Index since 1980. The other thing that's really significant is if you look at the debt distribution by income quartile, is you actually see a pretty exploitive situation happening. What's happening is this bottom 25% is being targeted by a lot of the for-profit companies, and it isn't necessarily intentional, but they're able to get money. And what's happening is 58% of the entire debt load is happening to the bottom 20%, 25%. Now, some of that may be because they have lower income to begin with, but that's one of the big barriers why they don't want to go to college, is because they know that they're going to have to take on that debt. So if you look at, and what this chart really is looking at is it's looking at what does a disruptive Christian college need to be to cross the chasm and to serve and reach the under half. So City Vision, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to serve the bottom half socioeconomically. So that, if you had to say what's our target market, that's our target market. That's for undergraduate programs. For graduate programs, I'd say we're serving the bottom 75%. And to really serve the unreached bottom half, you have to do 5 things. You have to be radically accessible. So different groups have done that reasonably well. So community colleges have done that. For-profit colleges have been very accessible. The high-priced online education has been accessible. So all of those have those check boxes. But traditional Christian colleges, state schools, typically haven't done that because they require that you relocate to another location. You essentially, they're following the monastery model, and that's, where the university model came from. And, people go off to a retreat and learn as compared to making it radically accessible. And then you have the next step, which is radically affordable. And here, community colleges have been the closest to that. I think that they're only the beginning of what's possible. I think that, over the next 10 years, you're going to see models that are a tenth the price of community colleges. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of radically affordable. Then you have the other category of that, and I think that this is essential really to get to the radical affordability, is being a tech innovator. So a disruptive Christian college is going to need to be a tech innovator. Community colleges are not tech innovators. And in the developing world, there's these mega universities that have 1 million plus students, and they're not tech innovators. But for-profit colleges are tech innovators. The high-priced online colleges, whether for-profit or non-profit, are tech innovators. Then there's a cultural match. Are you requiring that people either assimilate across class or across race? And a lot of colleges have done better about not requiring assimilation across race, but almost all colleges require assimilation across class, and I've written a lot about that also in my dissertation. And the question is, are you meeting the community at its culture? So community colleges have actually done a really good job of that. If you go into community college, it feels very accessible to working adults. It feels accessible to people from urban communities, and generally very diverse. So that's going to be a part of the need. For-profit colleges, sometimes they're a good cultural match. Sometimes they're not. High-priced colleges, sometimes they're not. Traditional Christian colleges generally aren't, and state schools generally aren't a cultural match with the bottom half, largely because they just don't have the bottom half there. The bottom half is going to be the talented tenth there, and they're not going to be in the majority. And then, the other question is, a lot of people, they'd like to go to school, but they may have a seventh grade reading level and they need to get their reading or writing up. Do you provide significant remedial education? The leaders in that have been community colleges, and I think that that's a part of what disruptive Christian colleges need to be. So, people ask me, what's the distinctives of City Vision College? I would say this top check boxes, radically accessible, radically affordable, tech innovator, cultural match with the bottom half, providing remedial education. That's really what the distinctives are for us. So why are we uniquely positioned? So City Vision is a part of the parent. It's kind of more like a holding company you could think of, a holding organization. It's a nonprofit organization. And the values of that organization are Jesus, so we're a Christian institution, justice, that's why we serve the bottom half, the bottom three quarters, we're about access, and then technology, that's how we get to the radical affordability and the radical accessibility. Just to give you the history of City Vision College, it started as Rescue College in 1998 as a program of the Association of Gospel Rescue Missions. Many of you have rescue missions in your city. And they provided a program to train rescue mission workers and also to train formerly homeless adults. It was accredited in 2005, and they realized, we can't grow the school if all we're serving is rescue mission workers. So they transferred it to Tech Mission. At that point, Tech Mission was the third most visited Christian organization among Christian organizations serving the poor on the web. And we had a lot of visibility in that space. And the degrees that we provide at City Vision College, we're focused on bachelor's in nonprofit management, addiction studies, and missions. Our strongest degree program is addiction studies, and part of that comes from the founder, Michael Limata, who is the outgoing dean. He, is a national Christian leader in the Christian recovery program, Christian recovery community. Some of the stats of our student body, you can look online to find out more detail. Fairly diverse. Close to 80% or 79% received Pell Grants, had a 67% graduation rate, 91% job placement rate or placement in grad school. We've tripled our enrollment since 2008. We're still fairly small, about 150 students, but our goal is to be radically affordable. So our tuition, non-discounted, $6,000 a year for undergraduate, and our graduate degree, our entire degree is $10,800. It comes down to $9,000 a year. And for interns, and we have about a third of our students serve as interns in ministries. They get their tuition for $3,500, which is often paid for by ministries. And then we provide our tuition for $3,000 a year in developing countries. So that puts our costs at less than, this is non-discounted price, at less than 95% of private nonprofit institutions. We're the 16th lowest Christian institution. And our tuition is about 1/4 of the CCCU average, and less than half of Liberty University, and about 1/5 of the national average of all four-year colleges. So just to talk about, what is City Vision's strategy and what are we doing? So, whenever it was called Rescue College, that was before it was transferred to Tech Mission. So that was from 98 to 2007. It just had one degree program focused on urban missions. And then we go into what I'd call City Vision 1.0. That was from 2008 to 2014. And I would say our focus was on degrees for Christian social services. And that's still the core of what we do, and I think one of our core competencies. But part of what we realize, if we're just training people to work with the poor and to work with at-risk communities, we're not all, that's not a complete system, because you need to be able to train them to work in the business and, make it out of the hood too, and to use that money to go back to the hood. And but so that's really the vision of City Vision 2.0. So that's really started in 2015, focused on being radically affordable, socially responsible Christian education, and we're starting to add business degrees as a part of that, but with an emphasis on the social responsibility. So if you look at a key part of our strategy is we're trying to learn from, one of the biggest successes in the social sector is microfinance. And what microfinance realized is that urban communities and the poor have amazing social capital. You just have to tap into that social capital. But what they realized is that to do that, you needed to connect them. You need to connect two things. So you get a microfinance organization, so that could be Gramian Bank, or it could be, there's a lot of Christian organizations that are doing this, Opportunity International. And what they do is they work with local community partners where there's trust, and then they connect them with a global funding ecosystem. And that has been tremendously successful. I would say we're getting ready to go through what I would call a micro college partnership, and that's what we're trying to do with City Vision. Is we're trying to partner with the strengths of local ministries, local organizations, and even families. So they have relational trust with ministry participants. They have discipleship programs. They provide practical experience. They provide training needed for specific contexts. They provide accountability on site. And then what City Vision brings to the table is we bring the accreditation, the access to financial aid, educational experience, increasing a ministry's capacity through outsourcing. And to a certain extent, this could almost be like a micro franchise type model. And we provide the Christian focus. And what we do is we connect them with global educational resources, what I call the courseware ecosystem, where there's a lot of innovative, low-cost access to diverse content. So this is really the summary of what we're trying to do with City Vision. So, in technical terms, this is called unbundling. What you do, the university is often been criticized by trying to be everything for everybody, and in many ways it was, like the old computer industry, the mainframe industry, before it was unbundled by Microsoft. You had, IBM. They created the chips, they created the software, they did everything, and then it got unbundled. And I think the same thing's happening in universities, and the internet provides this opportunity. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build on what I call the courseware ecosystem. So a lot of people have read about MOOCs. I think they're somewhat interesting. I think they might be interesting once they grow up. But we're building on other courses. So we've partnered pretty extensively with Straighterline, where we're doing a partnership this year that we're hoping is going to bring in potentially 500 plus students. So that's part of where we get this, some of our growth goals. And we're also looking at building on some of the courseware systems that are provided by Pearson and McGraw-Hill. If you look at what's been provided by Western Governors University, Western Governors largely has built their entire system off of courseware from Pearson largely, and a little bit of McGraw-Hill. We want to do the same type of thing, building on Pearson, McGraw-Hill, potentially building on some of the MOOC courses. MOOCs can be a source of content, but they also can be a source of students. We plan to provide most of our courses as MOOC content. And then we also build a lot of our courses on open educational resources. Our master's program in technology and ministry, about a third to half of the resources that's used in those courses are actually open educational resources. So that's the bottom half. So we have a lot of expertise in how do you package these into degree programs, how do you get these things accredited. And then we partner with micro college partners. So we have extensive experience in working with internship sites. So we used to run an AmeriCorps program. We placed over 500 full-time AmeriCorps members that served about 22,000 at-risk youth. And we decided that AmeriCorps, it was easier to walk away from the government funding to allow us to innovate. So we walked away from $1 million grant that would basically so we could focus more on innovation and not be restricted by the government. So since then, we've actually grown the number of sites. We have 70 plus internship sites, and the way this program works is it's kind of like a work-study program, but instead of working on campus, you're actually working 30 hours a week for a ministry. In exchange, that ministry pays your tuition, and it becomes a financial aid part. So we have about 50 interns placed every year. And we've also developed a program on competency-based based education where we will work with unaccredited ministry training, unaccredited church training. Some of the best Christian training out there is offered by churches, is offered by ministries, but it may not be accredited because of all the regulatory issues you have to run into with accreditation. And what we can do is, if people can demonstrate the knowledge, we can provide them with competencies up to 30 hours of credit. So we already have a partnership with World Impact's TUMI program, and we plan to expand that hopefully to 10 more partners in this next year. And we also, so that's the second square up there, we also will partner with ministries and missions organizations that say they have some training and they are doing this training to a large group. One group we work with has 10,000 people that do short-term missions trips, and they said we train all of them in a program that really is college quality, and we want to provide that to a subset of those students, a college course. So we partnered with them, and we're going to be implementing that this spring. They're going to bring us 500 students. And then in the long term, where we want to go really is we see a big opportunity for partnering with individuals, families, homeschools, and Christian schools, where we could provide dual enrollment and really enabling, almost like a little mini franchise where people can just bring this in, and all of a sudden you have the components you need to provide college and accreditation. So that's the vision. Hopefully, this is something that gets you excited. If you have questions, you can try to contact me and find out more. You can go on our website to find more about our, who our faculty are, who's our board, who our staff are. But we'd love to talk more with you about our vision. So thanks a lot.